Hi everyone, welcome to my channel, where we discuss all things films. Today we're going to talk about The Banshees of Inisherin, written and directed by Martin McDonagh, released in 2022. The film takes place on the fictional Irish island called Inisherin, against the backdrop of the Irish Civil War. The story itself is actually quite simple. It is about a friendship that comes to an abrupt end when one of them tells the other,
"I just don't like you no more."
This film is packed with symbols, metaphors, and mythological references, starting with its title. So, what is a banshee? A banshee is a female spirit in Irish folklore who heralds the death of a family member, usually by screaming, wailing, shrieking, or keening. And in this film, it is represented by an elderly woman named Mrs. McCormick. It is evident that the theme of death plays a major role throughout the film. And do notice how it is specifically related to death in families, because it hints at what's to come later on. Although the beautiful cinematography, the amazing acting, and the moving soundtrack all contribute to making The Banshees of Inisherin a stunning piece of cinema, what struck me the most was actually its circular structure. How every character and situation comes full circle, and how beginnings and endings are always interlinked. So, without further ado, let's get into the first circle, which is the fate of Dominic. Dominic is a well-intentioned boy who lives on the island with his policeman father. However, he is not the brightest crayon in the box because the others frequently describe him as dim-witted and foolish. Tragically, Dominic's death is one of the two physical deaths that occurs in the film. It may have been a shock to many when his untimely demise is revealed. Yet, his fate was hinted at since the very beginning. Remember when Dominic first appears, he's holding a stick and a hook? Remember what he says about it?
Look at this I found. A stick with a hook. What would you use it for, I wonder? To hook things or a length of a stick away?
And now, fast forward to the scene of his death, where it is the only instance we see the stick being used to hook something. In this case, it is used to hook Dominic's body, which just so happens to be the length of a stick away. Padraic explains the death as an accident, saying he must have slipped and fell into the lake. The true circumstance of Dominic's death is perhaps revealed by his father. In an earlier scene where Padraic heads to Mrs. O'Riordan's, he is surprised to also find Mrs. McCormick present. Later, when Dominic's father Potter the policeman arrives, he brings news of two deaths, and the first one he describes as follows.
Fella killed himself, or Ross Muckway. Walked into a lake for himself. 29 and nothing wrong with him. The fool.
Which makes us wonder, did Dominic really die from an accident, or did he die a death foretold by his father? And now, on to the second circle, which is the departure of Siobhan. Siobhan is Padraic's sister and his only living family member. She is portrayed as an intelligent woman with a mind of her own. Although there are many conflicts throughout the film, she seems to be the only one in conflict with her surrounding, the island. And this is shown through the use of color, specifically the contrast between red and green. These two colors frequently appear together in moments of discord and tension, noticeably the moment where the first severed finger is thrown. Siobhan is dressed in red and green when she first appears, which could imply an internal struggle she has with herself. Throughout the film, she is often dressed in all red, unlike any other character on the island, which makes her a sharp contrast to her surrounding. When she receives a letter offering her job off of the island, she stands in the green doorway and declares nobody's leaving. However, she eventually decides to leave and posts what we assume to be an acceptance letter in the letterbox. What is interesting here is that the letterbox was completely red when Padraic visited earlier. Yet, when Siobhan posts her letter, the letterbox is in the process of being painted green. This could signify that she got out just in time, before either being forced to submit to a life on the island or missing her last opportunity to escape. When Siobhan leaves the island, we see her dressed in a yellow coat, implying that she has finally found peace in her departure. Siobhan's exit from the island leads us to the third circle, which is Padraic's loneliness. During one of the first conversations between Padraic and his sister, she asks him if he's ever lonely, to which he responds rather dismissively.
Do I never get lonely? What's the matter with everybody? Lonely. Thinking.
However, as the story progresses, we bear witness to Padraic's slow descent into complete isolation. The first loss comes as no surprise, which is Colum's sudden rejection of their friendship. The second loss is Dominic, who leaves him after finding out a cruel lie Padraic told, in order to get rid of a musician that he saw as being too friendly with Colum. The third loss is his beloved miniature donkey Jenny, who kept him company through sad and challenging times. The fourth and final loss is the loss of his sister Siobhan, who leaves the island with no promises of returning soon. There are two sets of shots that demonstrate this brilliantly when compared. One is of Padraic sitting at his doorway, with his sister and his donkey around, and in the same doorway at the end of the film, both of them are absent. The second set of shots is of Padraic's bedroom, which he shares with his sister. At the end of the film, we see Padraic looking at the empty bed of Siobhan. However, the absence of Jenny is also implied through his missing blanket, which he uses to bury her. Padraic's solitude ties us into the next circle, which is the broken circle of 2. The significance of the number 2 starts with the 2 deaths predicted by Mrs. McCormick.
Maybe even 2 deaths.
The 2 deaths in Padraic's family,
Your mammy and daddy died, Siobhan.
and the 2 deaths Padraic speaks about in Mrs. Orden's shop. However, upon closer inspection, it becomes evident that the number 2 is used by Padraic in many other subtle aspects, starting with conversation. When Colum first explains to Padraic why he wants to part ways, he mentions,
The other night, 2 hours you spent talking to me about the things you found in your little donkey shite that day. 2 hours, Padraic.
When Padraic goes to Mrs. Orden's, he tells her.
Yes, so 2 weeks only for now, I think. Anyways, so 2 weeks only for now, Mr. Erden.
He also pleads with Colum, saying that,
There's 2 of us in this.
and remember how Padraic tries to name the 3 things he hates the most about the island? Yet, he only manages to name 2 things on both attempts.
2? Pudgy fiddle players. And 3? Wait, that's some funny thing for 3, what was it? Let's start again. 1, policeman. 2,
Pudgy fiddle players.
pudgy fiddle players. Shite, what was 3 then?
It's 2 o'clock, like.
Anytime Padraic extends an invitation to Colum, it is for 2 o'clock.
See you too, so Colin. So, do you want to meet me down the pub, Colin?
Even in the last instance, where he decides to burn Colum's house, he tells him he will do so on
Sunday, God's day, around 2.
The number 2 is perhaps symbolic of the balance and stability of Padraic's life, which ultimately shatters in the end. As the last time Padraic speaks of time with Colum, he says,
Anytime.
which finally breaks the pattern of 2. The very last circle that we're going to talk about is the film itself, starting with the setting. The island of Inisherin, which in a manner of speaking, is an enclosed circle in of itself. Remember how a banshee usually wails or screams to herald the death of a family member? Yet, we never see its representation, Mrs. McCormick, do that once throughout the film. Colum later provides an explanation for this when he says,
I just don't think that they scream to portend death anymore. I think they just sit back, amused, and observe.
Death is the main theme of the story. If its representation in the film, Mrs. McCormick, follows Colum's interpretation of a banshee, then perhaps the entire film is in fact Colum's story. Because it is also at this point where Colum reveals the title of the tune he's been working on throughout the film.
The Banshees of Inisherin, I was thinking.
Colum is essentially the one that sets the whole story in motion. His abrupt decision to distance himself from Padraic, and his drastic measures in doing so, sets off the chain of events that occurs in the film. Yet, after all that, he finds himself back at the beginning when Padraic says,
If you'd stayed in your house, that would have made us quits. But you didn't, did you? So it doesn't, does it?
so what was it all for? An interesting point worth mentioning is the masks in Colum's house. When Padraic enters the house looking for Colum in the beginning, he playfully puts one on. The one he puts on is in fact a Japanese snow mask, normally worn by the main actors in theater. Could this perhaps be a hint to Padraic's role in representing the dullness of Colum that Colum so desperately wishes to be rid of? When Colum's house burns in the end, the mask burns with it, which is also when we see Padraic coming out from the other side of death. Perhaps this signifies Padraic's freedom from his role in Colum's life. Or perhaps it signifies Colum's liberation from the dullness that was causing him such despair. What do you think?